Hello children, today's lesson is all going to be a science lesson, mainly based for Key Stage 2, and it's going to be on dissolving and evaporation. Mrs Newman's helped me with this because she is a secondary science teacher, so it's going to be really useful for those children going on to secondary school, because you're going to have all that lovely vocabulary ready for your experiments when you get there. So we're going to start thinking about dissolving and do an experiment. But first, before we do, you're going to need to go and gather your things together for the experiment. You need a glass, small glass. You need a measuring jug of water. Now I've measured up to 100 millilitres because we're going to be using 100 millilitres of cold water in this activity. You need a teaspoon and you need some normal salt. Okay, so pause the video and go off and get your equipment. Okay, I'm hoping you've got all your equipment together, and this is what we are going to do with our experiment. So first of all, you're going to take 100 millilitres of cold water and pour it into your glass. You're then going to take a level teaspoon of salt. You can do this with me. You're going to put that teaspoon of salt into your water and you're going to give it a stir. Give it a really, really good stir. What you're trying to do is to make that water dissolve the salt. So as you can see, it hasn't disappeared, but it's dissolved. So the water's still in there and the salt is still in there. And they're all incorporated in what's called little molecules. So the molecules of water we call the solvent, and the molecules of salt we call the solute. So we've got a mixture of the two which forms this solution. So when a liquid and a solid are dissolved together, they form a solution. And we know they're dissolved because we can't see any more salt crystals in there. What you're going to do next is you're going to take another spoonful of salt. So this is our second, keeping count now. And you're going to pop that into your water or into your solution. And you're going to give that a stir. And you're going to see if you can make all of those salt crystals dissolve. Give them a good stir. And I think that has all dissolved. What you're going to do now, in a minute you'll pause the video because you're going to do this yourself. You're going to see how many spoonfuls you can put in one by one, dissolving them one by one at a time until you can't dissolve them anymore. So I want you to add another one and then another one. I want you to count up for me how many spoonfuls you can get until it won't dissolve at all. So I want you to pause the video and do that for me now. So I'm hoping you've carried on with that experiment and you've seen how many spoonfuls of your salt you can add to the water without and eventually it not being able to dissolve anymore. When you reach that point, we call that the point of saturation. We say it's saturated. It's the point, and it becomes a saturated solution because the solute in there won't dissolve anymore. Okay, we say that it's saturated. Okay, so I've got a question for you now. Okay, you've got your saturated solution, your salt won't dissolve anymore. What I want you to do is in a moment to pause the video again, and have a chat with maybe the adult who's working with you or somebody else, or if nobody's working with you, have a think yourself. What could I do to make more salt dissolve now in that solution? If I wanted that solution to dissolve more salt, what could I do? Pause the video and have a little think of some ideas. Okay, so hopefully you've come up with some ideas of how you might be able to dissolve more salt in that solution. Two ideas you might have come up with. One of them, you might have said, I'm going to add some more water. I'm going to add some more water to my solution. Or you might have said, I'm going to warm up the water and see what happens if I do the same experiment and I do it with warm water. These are two things I want you to have a go at. But before we do, let's have a look at the science and let's see why it works. So, I want you to imagine this is our glass of water, okay? And this is this is our solution, and we've put everything in here. So here we have our water molecules. Just do these as our water molecules. And then what we've done, we've added salt to that, and so here's our salt molecules. Okay, and they're all added with our water molecules. When this gets all full up with water and salt, with solvents and solutes, that's when we say it's saturated. That's when we say it's saturated. So if we were to add more water to this, more water molecules, it's now not saturated because there's still some spaces. So there's still some spaces for some of this to dissolve. So it's likely that with more water, you're going to be able to, or with more solvent, you're going to be able to dissolve more of the solute. So with more water, you're going to be able to dissolve more of the salt. So that's something you could have a go at. The other thing that I thought about was if you warm the water. So if you did this experiment, just like we've done here, but instead of using cold water, but using warm water, would you be able to put more or less spoonfuls of water in to dissolve the salt that's in there? I'd like you to have a go and see if it makes a difference with warm water to cold water. Really good experiment to do. I'm going to get you to pause the video to have a go at that experiment and then come back to me for the last bit of the lesson. So hopefully you've had an experiment with warm water, and if you found that if you found that it's different with warm and cold water, what I want you to do is to find out why. See if you can find out why it might be different. So now you've got a nice solution here where we know that in here there's salt in here, but how could we get the salt crystals back into a solid? How could we do that? Here's your next experiment. What I want you to do for your next experiment is to make yourself up a solution. Make yourself up a solution of salt and water. Make it up so that it's really, really saturated. Okay, so that your solution is really, really saturated. Then what I'd like you to do is pour a little bit of it onto a plate or a saucer and then put it on a window ledge. So what we're looking for is we're looking for the warmth of where you've put it. It might be over a radiator or it might just be by the sunshine. We're looking for that water to evaporate. That water to evaporate. So if that water evaporates and we're removing the water from that solution, what are we going to be left with? Yes, you're right. If the water evaporates, we will be left just with the salt. So if you leave that on your window for a week or so, have a look and see if you can see that after the water's evaporated, the salt crystals are left. And so we've taken them from a solid, we've changed their state into a liquid. We should be able to then change the state back from a liquid into a solid again. So have a go at that. While you're doing that, you might want to do something that I found as an experiment that was quite a lot of fun to do with dissolving. So what I've got here is some candy floss. There are 8 little pots of this candy floss on the bus if you can't get hold of any yourself. So do go and help yourself to a jar of candy floss, okay, for this experiment. What I'm going to ask you to do is pop the candy floss on a plate and then pour 1 little teaspoon of water on top of that plate and see what happens. Once you've done that, you might be able to add another teaspoon of water on there. Have a look at what happens and see if you can tell me in scientific terms what's actually happening. Enjoy this experiment, and I look forward to hearing about your results.